It's funny you're relaying this, and I'm remembering something. I remember in a conversation with Bob Osher, he told me that when he was a resident, almost every weekend he was traveling around the
Yeah.
country, visiting some colleagues, going to operating rooms, just trying to see. He heard a cool technique. He
Yeah.
had back then. There was no such thing as YouTube or Instagram videos or
Yeah.
TikTok or Snapchat. You had to go and travel somewhere and meet someone, and maybe you're communicating through snail mail and arranging
Yeah.
these
Totally.
times to meet. That even today though, with as much as social media and the internet has facilitated connection at the blink of an eye in an instant, you still have to do it.
Right.
It's one thing to talk about how cool or interesting that might be, but then to actually take time out of your schedule, make arrangements in your life to go visit someone else. You're not going to be operating, you're just
Yeah.
going to be observing. Maybe you've never met them before, maybe it's in a different country,
Yeah.
different culture, different language. That takes a lot of initiative, but it also takes a lot of intrinsic motivation to improve
Yeah.
and to grow. And the barriers to that, I feel like, are large enough that the majority of ophthalmologists, or maybe let's say just majority of people in life, wouldn't do that. What was it? I mean, you're talking about a burning fire, a passion to become better at refractive surgery, cataract surgery, and before it's available in the U.S., you're traveling all around the world. You're working with their innovators in those other countries so that you can sort of understand things as they're coming to us. Was it your father who instilled that in you, or is it just like because you love ophthalmology and what you do so much?
Yeah. He was a huge fan of traveling and seeing what the next person was doing. It's interesting. He showed me some of his early correspondence. He went down to see Chuck Williamson, Blake Williamson's father, to learn radiokeratotomy, and he had his radiokeratotomy book that described all the places he had gone to learn. He talked about K-Spear, Bear Care, some other, internationally and nationally, where he learned these techniques. Chuck Williamson was mentioned that, which is amazing because he's still working strong, a pioneer down in Baton Rouge. So, but seeing his passion for travel to gain that knowledge, I think instilled upon me that desire. And like I was discussing before, ophthalmology is a smaller field, and what's neat about ophthalmology, you do have that opportunity to send, an email to a world expert and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be in XYZ country. I'd love to see you operate. I'd love to see your clinic. Can I swing by? And most ophthalmologists, I say, yeah, sure. I look back, when I went to see Fedorov in Russia, that was snail mail before email, and we actually faxed back and forth. I said, faxed a letter and described who I was and say, I'd love to come to Russia for a month and learn from you. And he helped arrange it, and we made it happen. He was literally the father of radiokeratotomy, and welcomed me to his OR. So you see that time and time again. A lot of our colleagues that are on that forefront have that same philosophy. I know, I talked to Blake Williamson, and he talked about before he started practice, he called it his road trip. We went down south and went through Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and he named these, Oklahoma. He named some of the surgeons that I've heard of that are top in their field. And he said, I spent a day or two with each of these surgeons. I wanted to see how they ran their clinic, how did they do their surgery, how were they at the top of their career. And and number one, you have to look at it and see it and observe it, but you have to internalize that and realize, how do you apply it to what you're going to be doing in the future? And that can be a whole art in and of itself.
Yeah, it's amazing because we're so isolated in our training environment.
Yeah.
When you're in residency, you might have a lot of different attendings, but they're your only attendings. And now, I mean, things are different with YouTube, and you can go online and watch any surgical video from around the world and hear great lectures for free from the academy meetings.
Right.
But when you're in the trenches or you're being staffed by an attending, it's pretty much their way or the highway, unless they let you experiment or try new things out. And what I found really interesting was when I was on the fellowship interview trail, it was in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So all the academic institutions said, we're not doing in-person interviews. So they were just virtual interviews. It's kind of hard to gauge a sense of people if you're not in person and sensing their energy or seeing the facilities, seeing how the current fellows are going about their day-to-day tasks and duties. But all the private practice fellowships either mandated, if you want to be considered, to do an in-person interview, or they were open to it and encouraged it if the virtual interview went well. So I found myself conveniently on my pediatrics rotation as a PGY4 ophthalmology resident in my chief year, going on a lot of these in-person interviews for these private practice cataract and refractive fellowships. And one of the amazing benefits of that was just seeing how these different surgeons in these high volume settings did something as simple as, making a capsulorhexis or making incisions so differently. And I was getting all these pearls and seeing all these things that I never saw in person in residency when I was operating, because my attendings were used to doing things a certain way. They felt comfortable doing things a different way. So seeing that diversity in surgical technique, clinical acumen, but then also just seeing how practices were run in different settings. And it was really fascinating during the pandemic, seeing how each of these practices responded differently to the pandemic. So there's nothing that has broadened my perspective more than in ophthalmology than visiting other practices, visiting other institutions, communicating with people outside of maybe your regular sphere, your circle, because there's so many ways to skin a cat. There's so many ways to do every single step of cataract surgery. The beautiful thing about our field is everyone's usually trying to come up with a better way to do something or a more efficient way to deliver better outcomes. And for me personally, traveling and visiting other surgeons has been a massive boon myself as growth as a clinician and as a surgeon.